Her name was Dorothy. In 1952, her sister Margaret borrowed $40 from her. Margaret never paid it back. Dorothy did not speak to Margaret for 11 months. Then, on a Saturday morning in October, Dorothy drove to Margaret's house in Akron, Ohio. She carried a pound cake she had baked herself. She walked in. She sat down. She poured them both coffee. She never mentioned the $40 again. Not once. Not in 40 more years of knowing Margaret. Her granddaughter asked her once, near the end of her life, if she had forgiven Margaret. Dorothy looked puzzled by the question. She said, "I stopped being angry. I don't know if that's the same thing." The formal study of forgiveness as a clinical practice did not begin until 1985. That was when Dr. Everett Worthington at Virginia Commonwealth University started what would become 40 years of research. The Stanford Forgiveness Project, the first large clinical trial of forgiveness training, did not launch until 1999. Dorothy was 80 years old by then. She had been doing it for decades, without a name for it. She had no therapist helping her process the wound, no resentment journal, no unsent letter exercise, no anger management course. Raymond Novico published the first formal anger management framework in 1975. In 1952, none of it existed. No conflict resolution coach, no podcast about the neuroscience of grudges, no forgiveness workbook with 6 steps. What Dorothy had instead were 10 habits so ordinary she never thought to call them anything. She called it getting on with life. Nobody on her street called them anything either. Because every woman on that street had them. Then something changed. Not what it means to be wronged, not what the human heart needs after a betrayal. What changed was who got paid when those needs were given a name, a framework, and a price tag. Before number 10, subscribe. This is exactly what this channel is here to make. Number 10. Dorothy addressed the grievance while it was still small. October 1952. The money had been borrowed 3 weeks earlier. Dorothy said something about it plainly. Once, to Margaret's face, not to anyone else, not to her mother, not to Agnes next door. The grievance did not accumulate. It did not compound. It did not become something larger than it actually was. Research from the University of Florida found that early, direct expression of a grievance reduces its emotional intensity by over 60% compared to grievances that are left unaddressed for more than a month. The conflict resolution and workplace mediation industry is now worth over $9 billion globally. Much of it untangles resentments that could have been resolved with a single direct conversation years earlier. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 9. Dorothy did not recruit allies. She did not call her mother. She did not tell Agnes over the fence. She did not explain to her church friends why Margaret was wrong. She held the grievance between herself and Margaret. She resolved it between herself and Margaret. This was not only loyalty, it was structural. Every third party, she told, would give her agreement rather than resolution. Agreement keeps a wound open. Resolution closes it. Research published in Emotion, a journal of the American Psychological Association, found that venting anger to sympathetic listeners reliably extends the duration of the original grievance rather than reducing it, a process researchers call co-rumination. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 1 on this list is the habit the forgiveness industry cannot package. It has no market size. It has no launch year. Number 1 is still coming. Number 8. Dorothy gave the relationship more weight than the incident. $40 was real. 11 months of silence was real. But 30 years of sisterhood, their mother's death, the war letters, the christenings, the arguments that had passed before this one weighed more than $40. This was not naive. Dorothy knew the money was gone. She simply decided the calculation did not favor the grudge. Dr. Everett Worthington at Virginia Commonwealth University, who studied forgiveness for over 40 years, identified this as one of the most durable mechanisms of genuine forgiveness, weighing what is preserved against what is lost by maintaining anger. Dorothy did this math without a workbook. The result was the pound cake. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 7. Dorothy separated what Margaret did from who Margaret was. Margaret borrowed $40 and did not repay it. That was true. It was also true that Margaret had driven 40 miles in a snowstorm the year Dorothy's youngest had croup, had sat up all night with Dorothy after their mother's funeral. Dorothy did not let what Margaret did erase what Margaret was. Research published in Psychological Science found that people who attribute another person's negative action to character rather than circumstance maintain anger significantly longer. Those who consider context forgive significantly faster. Dorothy considered context. The $40 did not cancel 30 years. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 6. Dorothy had no medium for broadcasting her grievance. In 1952, the available amplifiers were tell people in person, write a letter, or say nothing. The first two required effort. The third cost nothing. Dorothy chose the third. The grievance stayed between two people, where it could be settled by two people. Social media advertising generated over $200 billion globally in 2024. Its core design, the post, the public call-out, the permanent record, makes private grievances public and nearly impossible to fully resolve. Dorothy's grievances could not go viral. They stayed exactly the size they actually were. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 1 costs nothing. It requires no appointment. It has been available to every human being since before history began. Almost there. Number 5. Dorothy worked with her hands when the anger was still in her body. The morning after a difficult conversation, she scrubbed the kitchen floor. She kneaded bread. She hung laundry until her arms ached. Not as therapy, because there was always something to do. Research published in Health Psychology found that repetitive physical activity reduces circulating cortisol measurably within 20 minutes, independent of emotional state at the start. Gandeng Orange. The somatic therapy and body-based anger release industry is now worth billions as part of the broader wellness market. It sells what Dorothy got free from the Monday laundry. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 4. Dorothy understood that bitterness cost her more than it cost Margaret. The $40 was gone, that was certain. But 11 months of anger, the sleepless nights, the tightness in her chest at church, the moment she almost did not go to Margaret's daughter's christening, that weight was hers to carry, not Margaret's. Psychology Today, citing multiple clinical studies, has confirmed that chronic resentment elevates cortisol, suppresses immune function, and measurably increases cardiovascular risk. The person holding the anger bears the physiological cost. The person they are angry at often does not. Dorothy worked this out herself, without a study. She showed up with the pound cake. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 3. Dorothy gave her anger a private time limit. She never called it that, but 11 months was 11 months. At some point, no specific date, no formal decision, she decided that carrying the weight further served no one. She did not announce this. She did not write it down. She baked a pound cake and drove to Margaret's house. Researchers studying emotional regulation have found that privately setting informal time boundaries on a grievance, even without sharing that boundary with the other person, significantly accelerates resolution compared to leaving anger open-ended. Dorothy set her limit. Without naming it, without a system, Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 2. Dorothy did not confuse forgiveness with approval. She did not pretend the $40 had not happened. She did not tell Margaret it was fine. She did not perform a reconciliation she did not feel. She simply decided to stop letting the grievance occupy her. Dr. Fred Luskin, who launched the Stanford Forgiveness Project in 1999, defined forgiveness precisely this way in his clinical research, releasing the emotional debt without endorsing the behavior that created it. The two are separate decisions. Dorothy made the first one, she never made the second. The pound cake was not an absolution, it was a decision about where she was going to put her energy for the next 40 years. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Number 1. Dorothy did not believe bitterness was something that happened to her. She believed it was something she could choose not to carry. This is the one the forgiveness industry cannot package. It requires no program, no framework, no practitioner, no 6-step workbook. It requires only the decision, made once, privately without witnesses, that the weight of the grievance is heavier than the loss that caused it, and that you are the one carrying it, not them. Dorothy's mother had told her once, holding a grudge is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Dorothy put down the cup. Dorothy never had the product. Dorothy never had the problem either. Dorothy passed away in 2002. She was 83 years old. Margaret outlived her by 4 years. At Dorothy's funeral, Margaret was the first to speak. She talked about the pound cake, the one that arrived on a Saturday morning in October 1952. She said she had never forgotten it. She said she had never understood how Dorothy had managed it. The $40 was never mentioned. Dorothy's granddaughter, sitting in the front row, finally understood what her grandmother had meant. She had not forgiven Margaret in the way the workbooks describe it. She had simply decided that 40 years of sisterhood outweighed $40 of resentment. 10 habits Dorothy never named, never wrote down, and never once thought to call a forgiveness practice. She called it not letting things take root. What changed between Dorothy's life and the world you inhabit today was not what the human heart needs after being wronged. Those needs have not changed since 1952. What changed was who got paid when those needs were given a clinical framework, a 12-step program, and an hourly billing rate. Pick one thing from this list. Come back in the comments in a week and tell me what it did. If you have ever carried something longer than it deserved, tell me below. I read every single comment. The next video is already waiting.